Hey everyone, welcome. This is my first live stream from the Cayman Islands. This is my last day on vacation, and I wanted to do a live stream with you guys to talk about master creation of your reality from the ego and from the higher self. And this is something that I was actually giving a little bit of thought to on the plane ride down here. And before I start though, I just want to show you like how awesome is that water. It's so blue. It's so blue. It's been a little bit cloudy the last couple of days, but finally on my last day, we've got some really nice sunshine. So let's talk about the ego and the higher self, because a lot of us are trying to create this desired reality. And we talk about living from the heart space, living in 5D. But what we don't often talk about enough is the role of the subconscious and the role of the ego, in how the ego is really doing a lot of the work in creating our reality despite a lot of our conscious efforts. And what we don't realize is that our personality actually creates our personal reality. And if we're living from the ego in the subconscious programming, then the ego is actually the one responsible for creating our reality. So, one of the things that is important for us to always remember is that the ego loves to live in the past. The ego wants to not move forward, to not go outside the comfort zone. The ego wants to stay within everything that it knows. And so it always defaults to the past. And the past is all of the things that have been programmed into us through a lot of our modeling, through our parents, through our family life, through what we've learned in school. Basically, a lot of what we learned in the first 7 years of our life, because we don't actually access our conscious awareness until after about seven years old. Hi, Zephyr. Good morning. I'm glad you made it too. So, if the subconscious is controlling roughly 95% of our reality creation, despite our best efforts, despite all of the things we're still trying to do, we're not aware of the programs running in the background, like apps on our phone. If we're not aware of all of the destructive belief systems that prevent us from actually creating our reality that we want, this reality of 5D living that so many of us are striving to manifest, then we're kind of working against a lot of efforts. So one of the things to always remember is that the ego will live in the past, which means the ego wants to remember judgment, remember guilt, remember fear, remember shame, and uses all of those belief systems to create what's actually happening. So, for instance, if you're trying to create a reality that is heart-based, living from love, unconditional love, but your belief system from when you were a kid tells you that love isn't conditional, or sorry, love is conditional. It's not unconditional because, for instance, perhaps your parents, said, if you don't do this, you won't get that. So it's a very common thing that happens when we're growing up. And so, how do you live and create when deep down the ego doesn't believe in unconditional love? And despite how much we want to believe that we have control over our own ego, that our higher self is fully integrated, much more than our ego is, the higher self can only integrate more into our reality as we learn to get really comfortable with who our ego is. What is our personality with the ego versus the personality of our higher self? And really getting honest about what that actually is. Because if we're not willing to face certain truths about who we are, and then not only face them, but actually be accepting of it and loving of those aspects of ourselves, then we're constantly going to be swimming upstream. And if higher self is all about unconditional love, then how do we unconditionally love our ego? And that means there's a lot of need for acceptance. And even if there's certain parts of us that we're ashamed of, even if there's certain parts that we're highly judgmental of, we have to ask ourselves why and where does that stem from? What belief system is that ingrained in, rooted in? And it takes a lot of time to, through your meditations or through your reflection work, to go back into your past. It's why I talk a lot about working with your inner child, and why I promote it so much. Because working with the inner child, I'm telling you, I know I've said this a couple times before, it is literally the gatekeeper to creating 5D reality in your life, okay? It's the bridge between your ego and your higher self. And until our inner child feels absolutely healed, or at least acknowledged, at the very least acknowledged and heard and seen, ego keeps running the show. And the inner child will sabotage all of your desired conscious efforts to integrate your higher self into this present reality. And so as much as the higher self becomes the conscious parent of your entire reality, the conscious parent of what you're trying to do here in this now, the inner child will actually always go towards the ego instead, because the ego lives from a false sense of safety and security. And at least the inner child can get your attention through the ego. And so it's so important to understand this. So personality of the higher self is acceptance, is truthful communication, honesty, willing to be honest despite what anything looks like, willing to accept realities and looking at self. So that means when you look at your life, you look at your creations and what you're projecting into your hologram, and know that that is everything that is internally your state of being. So looking around, looking at your relationships, looking at your physical environment, how is that reflective of your inner state? And oftentimes the ego will trick us in saying, oh, it's not me, it's them. But everything outside of you can only be a reflection of what's going on within you. And so understanding this little kind of tidbit of how we're kind of creating our reality and how that personality creates our personal reality is so important. So getting to really know the personality of your ego is really important. Like, for instance, my ego's personality is very competitive, but not healthy competitive. I do believe there's a level of healthy competitiveness out there for you to strive for better. But before I started to become much more consciously aware of how I was creating everything in my life and doing everything without any intention, really living unintentionally, to be honest, I was like, okay, I'm very competitive because I look at things, if someone's doing better than me, then I kind of suck. And I would really look down on myself, and that I always wanted to be on top of my game. And so I always use this idea of like, well, if someone's better than me, then I have to be better than them, because there was such a discomfort, a level of discomfort within myself of feeling like I wasn't number one. And I got a lot of that from my dad. But knowing that unhealthy competitiveness and trying, and instead of working against others, I should have been just working through my own personal betterment of not trying to beat myself or beat anyone else, but more so of looking at okay, what are these areas that I don't feel necessarily superior at, and how do I improve that? Or more so, how do I learn to accept that? Maybe I don't need to improve it. Maybe I just need to accept it and understand what's the teaching and what's the lesson here in my competitiveness. What makes me so uncomfortable about not being number one? And of course, when I look back into my past, when I look back into the ego's program belief system of what I was ingrained with through like growing up, my dad always said, if you're not number one, you're last. And there's either you're a winner or you're a loser. And there's only one winner, and everyone else is a loser. And that got programmed into me as a kid. And of course, he didn't mean any harm by it, but this was something that was programmed into my subconscious and very much supportive to the ego. And I had to learn how to have healthy competitiveness without feeling like I was against everyone and literally against myself. So that's one aspect of, for instance, my ego's personality that I know is not the personality of my higher self. Personality of my higher self knows that it's always great to have competition in a sense that it keeps you on your toes. It keeps you wanting to be proactive in ways of improvement, not because you're not already good enough, but because there's always more to learn. There's always more to expand the mind and expand the heart. And when you're coming from that place, it's a completely different energy than winners and losers. So looking for certain personalities within your ego versus your higher self is going to help you understand how to create your desired reality. And I think, when I look at my life now and I look at my relationship, let's say with my parents, my ego always struggled for acceptance of who I am. And the ego was so determined to get their attention, and I would use tactics or methods of making my parents feel less than or perhaps stupid for not knowing some of the stuff that I was learning about. And of course, that is something that is ingrained in many of us when we're trying to, how do I put this? When we're trying to reach out for acceptance about things, we have a default switch that we have to come across as superior. Again, this kind of goes back to my competitive personality. We need to be superior as opposed to being a teacher that is open to all levels of learning and acceptance of all levels of where everyone is. And so instead of, when I started to really be more aware of how I was interacting with my parents, in realizing, well, the reason why I wanted them to accept me so much was because deep down I still hadn't yet been able to accept myself. And I was hoping that through their acceptance it would give me more confidence to be more me in public. But really, the only person that could do that for myself was me. And so I did realize that, and I knew that before my parents could ever accept me fully, I was going to have to be able to walk that walk without anyone outside of me accepting myself. And the more I was able to do that, the more I started to love all parts of myself and not be ashamed of them, despite not having the acceptance outside of me. And when that happened, my energy started to shift, and my parents started to realize that, and it made it more palatable for them to want to interact with me and actually ask me questions without me ever bringing anything up. And so through me actually integrating more of my higher self personality into this reality, through recognition of what was the ego's personality and how that was sabotaging what I truly wanted from my heart in this reality, I was then able to release the this incessant self-sabotage. What's the word I'm looking for? It's like a God. It's almost like a runaway train, you know. Like we get into these modes of runaway train, and you can't stop it. It's like a train wreck. Like you're just watching it all happen in real time, and you're like, I totally know I'm doing this wrong, but it's just I can't stop it. It's this programmed belief. It's like you almost feel like you're outside of yourself, and you're just watching it all happen, and being aware of that, and then accepting that part of me of like, oh wow, like the reason why I the reason why I seek this attention so much from my parents is because I felt so abandoned by myself. You know, there's a part of me that and this happens with all of us, no one's really exempt from this, where we abandon our true selves. And it's this whole journey is about coming back to true self, coming back to remembrance of the very aspects of us that get squashed as a kid, that get squashed through institutional learnings, and just living in a society that puts way more value on perceived reality versus what is. And when I started to really acknowledge that aspect and say, oh wow, like I feel unseen or unheard because I'm not really listening and hearing the cries of my true self, the cries of my inner child that wants so desperately to be remembered and seen, and to be allowed to flourish and be nourished in a reality that is supportive of my soul's true essence. And so when I started to actually live from that place without fear, without judgment, that's when a lot of the healing started to take place, and I was able to start rewriting some of the programs of the subconscious that were contributing to my reality creation that I didn't want, despite all of my best conscious efforts. And so learning how to overwrite those programs starts first with awareness. We always talk about how awareness is the greatest alchemy there is, and without awareness we can't change anything, but once we're aware of something we can't help but change. And so having this awareness of where we're sabotaging our conscious efforts on a subconscious level is so important. So I wanted to talk to you guys about that, and leave it with this of one of the things, just, you know, whether it's through pen and paper, like writing it down, it's actually really good to write this stuff down. Maybe you want to like reflect on it, meditate on it, but in a chart, like just put your ego on one side, your higher self on the other, and really be honest with yourself and say, what's my ego's personality? You know, and then what's my higher self's personality? And kind of cross those over from side to side and really look at them point for point and saying, okay, how do I create my reality from this particular part of my personality on the ego side? And how is it sabotaging all of my efforts right now from the higher self? And go back in time and say, where did this belief start? How did I get this program? Like, where did it all start from? Was it an experience? Was it a saying that was repeated over and over to me? What was it? And come into that awareness through just kind of writing it out. When you write stuff out, you take the intangible, abstract thinking of the feminine energy and put it into this reality of the masculine, the 3D. And it's how you start anchoring stuff into the now. And you also, when we write things down, they're just not ideas anymore just floating around. It's actually in front of your face, and there becomes a little bit more of an energy of truth anchored into that for you. So using that exercise could be helpful in understanding why things aren't working out the way you want to. Why, despite all of your best conscious efforts, are things still getting sabotaged? They may start off with some momentum, but then all of a sudden they lose steam and something always comes in to derail it. That was something that I was starting to realize was a pattern. So looking for those patterns is really important, and I think being able to discern what your personality is, of ego versus higher self, will help you understand how you're creating your personal reality, okay? So guys, I love you so much. When I get back, I'm going to be doing all of your tarot readings, and I'm so excited. I'm ordering this new tarot deck, and that is so gorgeous, and I can't wait to receive it. I don't think I'm going to get in time for this month's reading, but I will get it in time for the April reading. So let me know too if you guys are interested in me doing like live readings, because I've been contemplating doing that with you guys. So let me know. But I love you guys so much, and have a wonderful day, and I'll be back in reality pretty soon. Okay, I love you guys so much.